In this HTML and CSS tutorial, we're going to cover positioning. So positioning allows you to get the elements to go exactly where you want them to go on a page. And there's several different types. There's static, relative, absolute, fixed, and sticky. And static is basically the default positioning. So the first thing we're going to cover is relative positioning. And relative positioning basically positions an element depending on what you specify. It positions it based on its parent container. So in this situation, the window is the parent container. So it's going to be positioned based on its parent. So the best way to look at this is just through an example, and all we have here in this index page is just 4 divs and a with a class of box, and each one has their own ID. And then in our style.css page, we've got the class of box, and this div number 2 is going to be set to a relative position. So if we were to save this, and we'll see that there is a top position of, or a top of 20 pixels and a left of 300 pixels. So that means relative to this container, div number 2, again, this one here, if we give it an ID of 2, then this will be applied. But what's going to happen is it's going to go from the top 20 pixels and from the left side 300 pixels. So, and it's going to be changed to a background color of deep sky blue. So if we save this and refresh, we can see it go down 20 pixels and left 200 pixels. And you also see that there is a space left from where it's supposed to be. So the element is supposed to be here, but the document is leaving space for it. And remember, so we can change this top to 200 pixels, and now it's way down here. And you'll also notice that it was able to hover over top of another element. So now what if this div is inside of another div? Then is this div affected by the div that contains it? We'll find out. So if we create a div that contains the div that has the position of relative, this div 2, let's give it a background color of yellow, a height of 300 pixels just to see it. Okay. And then a position of a relative, so we can actually move it. And let's give it top position of 300 pixels. So is this div going to move? And the answer is yes, because this div is based on what is on its parent div. So the parent div affects the child div. Now we'll go ahead and talk about absolute positioning. And I went ahead and started over with our code. So we're back to just the 4 divs with no background div. And over here we've got, position relative still. And so you'll notice that there's space left over here with for the relatively positioned div. And this div here that's positioned relatively is affected by the parent element as well as the elements that it is a sibling of. So if we were to add another div, let's say we get rid of this div here. Oops. Okay, so we get rid of that div, and this this blue element, this relatively positioned element, moves with it, or moves because of it. So if we add it back, it's going to move. And if we add, let's say we add another one of these divs in front of it, it's going to move more because it's relative to the parent element, and it's also affected by the sibling elements. So now let's go ahead and get rid of this one again. And let's change this position to absolute. So if we save it and we refresh, now you'll notice that this div does not have any space for where it was supposed to be. So with the relative positioning, there's this big empty space for where div number 2 was supposed to go. But because now it's absolutely positioned, it's completely ignored. So we can get rid of all of these elements here, and nothing is going to happen to it. It's going to stay the same. So let's get rid of that. We refresh, it stays there. Let's get rid of 3 and 4, and it's still there because it's absolutely positioned. I just want to show you one more thing with the absolute positioning, and that is when you put it inside of another div. So let's go ahead and create a div, and we'll just give it a height of 500 pixels, a background pink, just to do something. Okay, so now we're gonna make another div, and well, let's just copy. Okay, and we're gonna turn this to blue, and let's save this. So we've got a div and then a div down here. So let's put this div, this div here, inside of this one down here. So we'll grab it, take it, and we'll put it in here. Let's get rid of it. Well, let's just keep it there, whatever. And we'll call it 3. Well, how about test div? So we'll save that, refresh, and it should be somewhere in here, but it's up here. And that's because, again, it is removed from the document and it is placed where it is supposed to be. So in this situation, it is 20 pixels from the top and 300 pixels from the left. But if you were to change this div here, the parent div, to a position of relative, then let's see what happens. So let's change this div to position of a relative. And now we get test div, but it's down here. And the reason it's down here is because now this test div is absolutely positioned relative to its parent element. And that's because its parent element has a position of relative. So if you have a position of relative, the absolute position is going to be based on its parent element, only if it's positioned relative. Fixed positioning is really quick and simple. Basically, if you switch the position to fixed and give a whole bunch of text enough to scroll, then what you can see is that the element is stuck wherever you put the element. So this is great for sticky nav bars that will stick to the top of the page no matter how far down you scroll. And that's about it. And then sticky positioning is it's only experimental and should not be used in production code, so we don't even need to really talk about that. Now let's go ahead and do an example or two of using the positioning together. So the first thing we'll start out with a blank document and we'll create a pros and cons list. So what we could do is we could start out with a div with a class of parent, and then we could close the div, and inside of this div we could have 2 other divs, and we'll give this an ID of pro, and this one an ID of con. So cons and pros. And then what we'll do is we'll give, well, let's go ahead and refresh and see what this looks like. Pros and cons. And now, so we've got the class of parent for the parent div. And we'll give this a height of 500 pixels, and a background color of yellow. So we'll go ahead and save that, and we'll see that we've got this. And, let's give it a width of 500 as well. Okay, so this is our list area. So now we'll go ahead and make a section for the children, for the pros and cons. And these are IDs, so we'll give it an ID of, oh, not that. So ID of pro, we'll give it a background of light green and a height of 250 pixels and a width of 250 pixels. And then we'll give con the same stuff, only a different background color. So background of deep sky blue, and height of 250 pixels and width of 250 pixels. And you'll notice that 250, these two together will perfectly fit inside the parent div. So let's go ahead and save that and refresh. And what happened here? Cons. Let's just do light blue. It still didn't work. Oh, that's because it's ID of con. Okay, so we've got light blue and this green element. So if we were to try to put these side by side, then we could give these a position of absolute. And let's give the con a position of absolute as well. We'll refresh. And let's make the pro on the top left. So we'll give it a top of 0 and a left of 0. And then we'll give the con top 0 and a right 0. So we'll go ahead and save that. And we have a problem. Our cons list is all the way over on the right, and it's outside of the container. And the green is outside of the container as well. You can see how it's outside. And the reason is because because absolute positioning completely removes the elements from the document and puts it in the exact position that you tell it to. So this is going all the way up to the top left, and this one's going all the way up to the top right. So what we need to do is make the absolute positioning relative to the parent container, because we want it inside of the parent. So what we can do is we can set the parent element to a position of relative. If we do that, then now it fits perfectly within the parent element. Because the parent element is relative now, the absolute positioning is going to be set based on what its parent element is doing, or what it's set to. So it's set to relative, so this is going to be absolutely positioned relative to the parent. And that's how we're able to do this. And now if you want to make it look pretty, you could do like an H3. And we can text align that to the center. And we'll probably want to get rid of our margin top. And now we have two div elements that are set up to be lists. And that's the first example. A good exercise to cover what we learned today is to do or recreate something like this. It's basically an image. You can imagine you're building an e-commerce store that has an image along with an on sale sticker above or on the top right, along with some text and a line that separates the text, the description of the product, and the image, along with a price tag that goes over top of a line. So try to do something like this to test your ability to use positioning. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Click on the eye icon at the top of the screen or click on the link in the description to get a free Build a Career in Technology ebook where we teach you how to code and how to improve your skills as a programmer. We also discuss different career options like getting a job, freelancing, and building a company. Our goal is basically to build a community around technology and to help people succeed in this industry. So by clicking on the eye icon, which should be at the top right of the screen or somewhere else if they've moved it, you can see all of what we have to offer and see how we can help you accomplish your goals. Be sure to subscribe to our channel for more tutorials, like the video, and leave a comment. Have a great day.